All right, good morning. Today is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. I'm Anthony, and this is Drive Dive. So thanks for clicking and watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. I appreciate you watching some future videos and maybe visiting some of my past content. I'd like to recap yesterday. Aside from the work day, right? We had soccer practice where basically my son's on the field and I'm running around with my daughter, entertaining her. She's telling me where to go. I'm trying to keep her off the field. She's biting my shoulder. She's trying to get onto the field and I guess play with some of the girls. I'm like, well, we can't really be on the field, but then I'm just holding her and I don't know, throwing her around and all this other stuff, for about an hour or so, snacking, etc. And then, I don't know, at some point after everybody goes to bed, I spent about an hour and a half continuing to paint my basement, doing the edging with my, 1.5 inch angled brush, cutting in, right, trying to not use tape on the ceiling or on the baseboards and just paint that real fine line and then come up an inch or two. I'll finish the base trim today or tonight and then tomorrow, finally get some paint on the walls before I get this desk installation done on Friday. So, right, I didn't get a chance to work out, but working on this basement project, is a temporary thing. I did stick to my diet, which is pretty cool, and I can continue making some progress there. So, the work day is always is what it is. Grading papers as a teacher, but I did get caught up on that stuff, and get through some things at work. So yeah, just still trying to be productive, and I hope that gives you some kind of indication of what my day looks like compared to your own, and I don't know, make the most of it, right? But you just gotta sometimes, like I was telling myself last night while I'm painting, I'm like, do I spend the hour on it, or do I just set sort of a benchmark, like this is the amount of progress I want to make, and then I'm there until I make that amount of progress. I wanted to make sure I painted all the way, the cut in on the ceiling, all the way from the corner to the window. Like that's kind of as far as I absolutely need to get before Friday. So I said, all right, that's what we're doing, and we're gonna be here till we get it done. Does that mean I rush a little bit? Maybe, but I don't think I made any mistakes. It just wasn't as so slow and methodical as I sometimes like to be with projects like this. So, but got it done. And then to jump into, I guess, a little bit of what I listened to, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People by Carnegie. I think I've made it to part 2 of the book, and chapter 2. Yesterday was about making people feel important, and then today we'll be talking about, I guess the main teaching was that you can't win an argument. Carnegie describes when you engage in an argument, I think he really means like petty arguments, you can't really win, right? If you lose the argument, sure, you've lost. But even when you do win the argument, my goodness, that guy just went through a red light. When you do win an argument, the person who lost this petty argument now might harbor resentment toward you. And I guess the example that he shares, I guess he's with a friend at some sort of event or dinner party where the guest of honor gave a speech, and the speech included a quote which the speaker attributed to the Bible. And I guess the person writing the letter, I don't think it was Carnegie himself, but Carnegie sharing someone else's story. This person, anyway, they're at this event, guest speaker, quote, person recognizes the quote as not from the Bible, but rather from Shakespeare. And so later on after the speech, they're all sitting together, and he voices this to the speaker and says, hey, that quote of yours was not from the Bible, but rather from Shakespeare. And there happened to be someone else, right? So now they're in this argument now about where that quote originates from. And there happens to be someone else at the table who is some sort of expert on Shakespeare's literature. So they turn to him. He recites the quote, or is informed of the quote, and he mulls it over, kicks the first guy who proposed this argument, and says, that quote is from the Bible. And later on, the two are discussing, right, without the guest speaker, who I guess incorrectly attributed the quote to the Bible. They're talking, and the Shakespeare expert says, of course I know it's from Shakespeare, but what good does it do to point out this inaccuracy, right? It's potentially embarrassing for the speaker, who this person knows and now is potentially embarrassed. Like, you're making a fool of everyone by embarrassing this guest speaker. So like, why even bring it up? Like, what's the big deal? What does it accomplish? Like, yeah, maybe it gives you a moment where you could puff your chest and prove how smart you are and how right you are, but ultimately it doesn't do any good. And so I think it's more not engaging in petty arguments, right? And choosing your battles, because I'm left thinking, well, no, there are definitely some arguments worth having, or there are definitely times when you want to push back and say, hey, I don't think that's wrong, or I think we should also consider, or I don't think this is the best course of action, right, based on X, Y, and Z, right? Have some facts to back it up, some literature, some experience, some data, right, depending on the context, depending on the situation. There are definitely some arguments that are worth having. But that exact story, I'm reminded of once when I was out to dinner years and years and years ago with my high school girlfriend, and her family and her grandfather's there, and we're talking about the NFL, and somebody had broken their collarbone, and I remember hearing on the broadcast something about how little it actually takes to break a collarbone, and I was trying to paraphrase that at the time and said something about X pounds of pressure. And my girlfriend's grandfather, who happens to be, or have been, right, happens to have been a physicist, I believe, informs me and the table that pounds is not a measurement of pressure. That pressure is force per unit of area. And he's 100% correct. I did misspeak. I should have paid more attention to my units, etc. But I don't know what that was. I don't know that was that him attempting to educate me, or was, as I said before, was that him puffing his chest and, whether he meant to or not, embarrass me, right? It's just so, it's things like that. Yes, I think we recognize things of that nature, opportunities where we can say, hey, that's not right, but do we voice it or not voice it? Do we consider the other person's perspective and how they might feel? Should I say that? What good does it do if I do? What harm comes if I don't, right? So what if that person continues going on talking about this quote and attributing it to the Bible? What does it matter if I go on and I keep saying, referencing pounds as a unit of pressure as opposed to just a pure force, right? So, right, who knows? But it's also interesting for me then, where as a classroom teacher, I don't know, a lot of times that's what I'm doing, right? Is pointing out errors in people's logic and their way of thinking, and some of their habits and routines and what they can do better. And I think that's my job. And that's the relationship I have in the classroom with my students, right? But I think there's an expectation there, right? I'm supposed to do these things. But like all situations, whether it's a dinner party, as Carnegie describes in his book, or like I described, my brief story, or now in the classroom, there are just ways to go about doing it, right? If I recognize that someone is doing something incorrectly, I can shout it out in front of the entire classroom, or I can find a way to approach that child individually at their desk, or perhaps out in the hallway, right? So even though people might know a conversation took place, they don't necessarily know the details of it. And the student or person to whom I'm speaking knows that I at least made the effort to correct them discreetly. And now there's no thinking that I did so to embarrass them. Right? I'm not trying to call them out. I'm not trying to put them on the spot. I am actually trying to correct them, and I did it in a way that avoids the potential embarrassment. So that's it for me. 10 minutes in, right? Quick recap of some of the ways I was productive yesterday with my children and, house projects. Reference to yesterday's video, making people feel important, and then recapping the second chapter, part 2 of Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So that's it. Happy Wednesday. Again, March 19th. I try to put a video out every day, so if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell, I'd appreciate it. Comment down below if you got any other relatable stories or any content you'd like me to touch upon. And that's it. Thanks so much. Have a great day.